He thought he was about to create the most embarrassing moment of the night, but in less than 60 seconds, he would be the one standing in silence, questioning everything he thought he knew about talent. The stage lights of the Midtown Talent Showcase burned bright against polished wood floors, casting long reflections as a line of polished performers waited backstage. Sequins, sharp suits, confident smiles. Everything about them screamed preparation, except for one woman standing quietly at the far end. Evelyn Carter, 68 years old, wearing a simple navy cardigan, her gray hair neatly pinned back, hands folded as if she didn't belong there at all. And maybe that's exactly what everyone thought. When her name appeared on the screen, a ripple of confusion moved through the audience, phones lowered, brows furrowed, and then came the voice of Jason Reed, the host, smooth, charismatic, and just sharp enough to cut. "Well, this should be interesting," he said with a smirk that lingered a second too long. "Evelyn, what will you be doing for us tonight?" And when she answered softly, "I'll be singing," a few scattered laughs slipped out before anyone could stop them, because nothing about her suggested a performance worth remembering. Jason tilted his head, leaning slightly closer, feeding the moment, singing, "Huh? Well, folks, let's give her a chance." But his tone carried that unmistakable edge, the kind that turns curiosity into quiet mockery. And somewhere near the front row, a judge exchanged a glance with another, one eyebrow raised as if to say this was filler, nothing more. Evelyn stepped forward, her shoes making the faintest sound against the floor, each step measured, unhurried, as if the noise around her didn't exist. And for a brief second, the camera caught her face in full light, calm, steady, unreadable, a stark contrast to the restless energy of the crowd. Jason gestured toward the microphone with a half smile. "Whenever you're ready." And as she reached for it, a low murmur spread again, not loud, not cruel, but dismissive, the kind of sound that says expectations are already decided. Somewhere in the back, a phone camera lifted, ready to capture what they assumed would be an awkward clip, something to laugh about later, something forgettable. But what no one in that room noticed, not Jason, not the judges, not the hundreds of eyes waiting for a misstep, was the subtle shift in Evelyn's posture, the way her shoulders settled, the way her grip on the microphone became firm, familiar, like muscle memory waking up after years of silence. And just before she opened her mouth, just before the first note had a chance to exist, the entire room hovered in that fragile space between judgment and truth, completely unaware that the moment they were about to witness wouldn't just change the show. It would redefine it. And Jason, still smiling under the lights, had no idea that in a few seconds, he wouldn't be the one controlling the stage anymore. The first note did not explode into the room. It arrived quietly, almost fragile, like a thread of sound that no one expected to hold any weight. And for a split second, a few people in the audience leaned back, still ready to dismiss it, still holding on to the assumption that this would confirm everything they believed about her. But then the note did not break. It deepened, it expanded, and something shifted, subtle at first, almost invisible, the kind of shift you feel before you understand it. Jason's smile held for a moment longer than it should have, frozen between amusement and confusion, because what he heard did not match what he saw. And the judge, who had hovered a finger near the buzzer, slowly lowered it without pressing, her eyes narrowing as if trying to locate the trick. Evelyn stood completely still. No dramatic gestures, no performance theatrics, just a steady presence as her voice carried through the speakers with clarity and control that did not belong to chance. Every note placed with intention, every breath measured. And the room, which moments ago had been restless and judgmental, began to quiet, not because it was told to, but because it had no other choice. In the third row, a man who had been scrolling on his phone paused mid-swipe, his thumb hovering in the air as he looked up, and near the aisle, a group of teenagers who had whispered earlier now leaned forward, their expressions slowly shifting from amusement to something closer to disbelief. Jason adjusted his grip on the microphone, his posture tightening, because the rhythm of the show had slipped out of his control, and he could feel it. The way the audience was no longer looking at him for cues, no longer reacting to his tone. They were listening to her. Evelyn's voice rose slightly, not louder, but fuller, revealing layers that had been hidden in that first quiet note. a richness that carried years of experience, discipline, and something deeper, something that could not be taught in a few rehearsals or learned in a weekend class. And as the melody unfolded, it began to reshape the energy in the room, pulling every scattered attention back to the center of the stage. One of the judges leaned forward now, elbows resting on the table, her expression no longer skeptical but focused, as if she were studying something rare, something she did not want to miss. And beside her, another judge exchanged a glance that said more than words ever could, a silent acknowledgement that they had misread the moment entirely. The camera operator, who had initially framed Evelyn loosely, adjusted the shot, tightening the focus, instinctively recognizing that this was no longer background content. This was the moment, and still, Evelyn did not rush. She did not push for approval. She simply continued, her voice steady, unwavering, filling the space in a way that made the earlier laughter feel distant, almost irrelevant, and somewhere in the back of the room, a hush settled so completely that even the faint hum of the lights seemed louder than before. Jason swallowed, his earlier confidence dissolving into something uncertain, because the narrative he had built in the first 30 seconds was unraveling in real time, and he could not stop it, not with a joke, not with a comment, not with anything. And as Evelyn reached the end of the verse, holding the final note just long enough to let it resonate, the room did not react immediately. It paused, suspended in that rare moment where judgment disappears and recognition takes its place. And in that silence, the truth began to surface, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. She was not here to be laughed at. She was here to be heard. And they were only just beginning to understand why the silence did not break immediately. It stretched, almost fragile, as if the room itself needed a moment to catch up with what it had just heard. And then Evelyn began again, this time not with hesitation, but with quiet authority, her voice rising into the next passage with a confidence that erased every doubt that had filled the space minutes earlier, and something deeper revealed itself, not just skill, but mastery, the kind that does not ask for attention because it commands it without effort. Jason stood just off to the side now, no longer the center of the moment, his smile gone, replaced by a tight expression as he watched the audience slip further from his control, his fingers tapping lightly against the microphone as if searching for something to say, but there was nothing to interrupt, nothing to diminish what was unfolding in front of him. The judges, once relaxed and dismissive, now leaned forward completely, one of them slowly shaking her head in disbelief, her lips parting slightly, as if she were witnessing something she had not expected to find on this stage. And the other judge, who had nearly pressed the buzzer earlier, now kept both hands folded, still, almost reverent, unwilling to disrupt even a second of the performance. Evelyn's voice moved effortlessly through the melody, climbing into higher notes with precision and control, each transition seamless, each phrase carrying emotion that did not feel performed but lived, and the audience responded not with noise, but with stillness, a collective focus that settled over the room like a quiet agreement. No one shifted in their seats, no one reached for their phones. Even the soft rustle of clothing seemed to disappear as every ounce of attention fixed on the woman they had almost dismissed. In the front row, a young girl who had come to watch her older sister perform sat frozen, her eyes wide, her expression slowly transforming into something close to awe. And beside her, her father lowered his crossed arms, leaning forward unconsciously, drawn in despite himself. The camera lights reflected softly against Evelyn's face, capturing every subtle expression, every controlled breath, and there was no strain, no sign of effort, only a calm presence that suggested she had stood on stages like this long before anyone in this room had formed their opinions about her. Jason swallowed again, shifting his weight, realizing too late that his earlier words now hung over the room like a quiet mistake, one that everyone could feel but no one needed to point out, because the contrast was already undeniable. As Evelyn approached the chorus, the energy shifted once more, not louder, but fuller, richer, the kind of sound that fills space without force. And it carried something more than technique, something that reached beyond the stage and into the people listening, pulling reactions that were no longer controlled or filtered. A woman near the aisle blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening, while another audience member pressed his lips together, holding back a reaction he did not expect to have. And still, Evelyn did not look around for approval. She did not acknowledge the growing weight of the moment. She simply continued, grounded, steady, as if the only thing that mattered was the music itself. And as the chorus expanded, her voice rising and settling with perfect timing, the room crossed a line that could not be reversed. This was no longer a surprising performance. It was undeniable, and in that realization, the last trace of doubt disappeared completely, leaving behind something far more powerful. Respect that had been earned in real time, and Jason, standing under the same lights that had once favored him, now understood that the stage no longer belonged to him at all. As the final line of the chorus unfolded, something irreversible settled over the room. Not excitement, not noise, but recognition, the kind that arrives quietly and stays. And Evelyn did not chase it. She did not lean into the applause that had not yet come. She simply held the moment with a stillness that made everything else feel smaller by comparison. Her voice softened just slightly as she transitioned into the final passage, not losing strength but gaining depth, each word carrying a weight that suggested a story far beyond this stage, far beyond this night. And the audience felt it, even if they could not explain it, because what they were hearing was no longer just music. It was experience shaped into sound, years of something unseen, now impossible to ignore. Jason lowered his microphone slowly, almost unconsciously, as if speaking now would be an interruption he could not afford to make. His earlier confidence replaced with a quiet tension, the realization settling in that every second he had spent setting up a joke had only made this moment more powerful, and now there was nothing he could do to reclaim it. One of the judges, the same one who had nearly dismissed her before she began, leaned back slightly, exhaling as if releasing something held too tightly. Her expression softened. No longer evaluating, no longer comparing, just listening. And beside her, another judge's eyes shimmered under the stage lights, blinking slowly, unwilling to look away even for a moment. Evelyn's posture remained composed, grounded, as if she had always known this moment would come, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty that did not need to prove itself. And as she approached the final note, the room seemed to draw in together, a collective breath held without instruction, without signal, every person present now part of the same silent anticipation. The lighting above her cast a soft glow that outlined her figure against the darkened audience. And for the first time that night, she did not appear out of place. She appeared exactly where she belonged, centered, undeniable, and completely in control of the space that had once tried to diminish her. Then came the final note, clear, sustained, unwavering, a sound that filled every corner of the room and lingered just long enough to settle into memory before fading, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with intention, like a closing statement that did not need explanation. And when it ended, there was no immediate reaction, no clapping, no movement, just a silence so complete it felt almost tangible, the kind of silence that only exists when something real has just occurred, something that cannot be rushed or replaced. Jason stood still, eyes fixed on Evelyn, his mouth slightly open as if searching for words that refused to come, because for the first time that night, he was not the one guiding the moment. He was part of it, and the audience, once ready to laugh, now sat in that quiet realization, understanding all at once that what they had nearly dismissed had just redefined everything they thought they were about to witness for a heartbeat. Nothing moved, and then it happened. Not as an explosion, but as a ripple that began with a single pair of hands rising in the front row, slow, deliberate, almost hesitant, and then another, and another, until the silence broke into applause that grew not louder but fuller, deeper, as if each person needed to stand to fully acknowledge what they had just witnessed. And within seconds the entire room was on its feet, a standing ovation that no one had planned and no one could stop. Evelyn did not react immediately. She did not bow quickly or gesture for attention. She simply stood there, holding the microphone at her side, her expression calm, her eyes steady, as if she had already made peace with the outcome long before the first clap ever sounded. Jason looked out over the crowd, his face reflecting a realization that settled heavily. The same audience that had laughed moments ago now stood in unified respect, and for the first time that night, he did not have a line prepared. He did not have a clever remark to fill the space, because there was nothing left to shape. The moment had shaped itself. One of the judges stood as well, placing a hand over her chest briefly before joining the applause fully, her earlier skepticism gone without a trace, replaced by something far more genuine, while the other judge nodded slowly, almost to herself, as if acknowledging a truth she could not deny. The camera panned across the room, capturing faces that had changed in ways they did not expect. A man wiping the corner of his eye discreetly, a group of teenagers clapping with an energy that no longer held irony, and the young girl in the front row now smiling widely, her earlier uncertainty transformed into admiration. Evelyn finally inclined her head slightly, not a dramatic bow, just a quiet acknowledgement, and in that small gesture there was a dignity that felt more powerful than any grand reaction. Because it did not seek validation, it accepted it without needing it. Jason stepped forward slowly, raising the microphone, his voice quieter than before, stripped of the earlier edge. "Evelyn, that was," he paused, the words catching, because what could he say that would not sound smaller than the performance itself? And in that pause, the truth became even clearer. Some moments cannot be summarized. They can only be experienced. Evelyn turned slightly toward him, her expression unchanged, composed. And for a brief second their eyes met. And in that exchange there was no resentment, no triumph, just a calm presence that made everything else feel unnecessary. The applause continued, not fading quickly but sustaining, as if the audience refused to let the moment in too soon. And the stage lights seemed softer now, less harsh, as though the atmosphere itself had shifted in response to what had unfolded. Jason finally lowered the microphone, understanding that anything more would only interrupt what was already complete, and he stepped back, giving the stage fully to the woman who had quietly taken it without ever asking. Evelyn took one small step back from the center, her hands relaxed, her posture unchanged, and as the applause slowly began to settle, there was a lingering awareness in the room, something unspoken but shared by everyone present, that they had just witnessed more than a performance. They had witnessed a correction, a moment where assumptions were replaced with truth, where judgment gave way to respect. And as Evelyn stood there in the fading echo of applause, it was clear that the story was not about how she sang, but about how easily she had been underestimated, and how completely she had redefined that judgment without ever raising her voice beyond the music itself. The applause did not end all at once. It lingered, rising and falling in waves as if the audience needed time to let go of something they had just gained. And even as people slowly returned to their seats, the energy in the room remained altered, heavier with awareness, lighter with understanding. Evelyn stood quietly at center stage, not stepping forward to claim the moment, not stepping back to escape it, simply present, as if she had always known that recognition, when it comes honestly, does not need to be chased. Jason cleared his throat softly, lifting the microphone again. But this time there was no performance in his posture, no attempt to control the narrative, only a careful respect in his tone. "Evelyn, that was extraordinary," he said, the words measured, sincere, and noticeably different from the voice that had introduced her. And for a brief second, the shift did not go unnoticed, not by the judges, not by the audience, and certainly not by Evelyn herself. She turned slightly toward him, offering a small, polite nod, not basking in praise, not rejecting it, simply accepting it as it was given, and that quiet response carried more weight than any dramatic reaction could have. One of the judges leaned forward, pressing the button to speak, her voice steady but touched with something deeper. "Evelyn, have you performed professionally before?" The question hung in the air, not accusatory, not skeptical, but genuinely curious, as if the answer might help them reconcile what they had just experienced. Evelyn paused for a moment, her gaze steady, her hands relaxed at her sides, and then she answered simply, "A long time ago," her voice calm, without emphasis, without elaboration. Yet those 4 words carried an entire history that no one in the room could fully see, but everyone could feel. A soft murmur moved through the audience, not disruptive, but reflective, people connecting the dots they had missed. Reconsidering the assumptions they had made too quickly, Jason shifted slightly, glancing toward the judges, then back at Evelyn, as if realizing that the story he thought he understood at the beginning had only just begun to reveal itself, and that realization settled into the space between them. Another judge leaned closer to the microphone, her expression thoughtful. "What made you come here tonight?" she asked, and the question seemed to reach beyond the performance itself, touching something more personal, something that invited truth rather than spectacle. Evelyn looked out at the audience briefly, her eyes moving across faces that now held respect instead of doubt, and for a moment, the room grew quiet again, not out of tension, but anticipation. "I almost did not," she said softly, and a faint smile touched her lips, not of amusement, but of reflection. "But I was told it might be time again." And with that, she did not say more. She did not explain who told her or why. And somehow that absence of detail made the moment stronger, leaving space for something deeper than words. The judges exchanged glances, understanding that what they were witnessing was not just talent returning, but courage, the kind that does not announce itself loudly, but shows up quietly when it matters most. Jason lowered his microphone slightly, his earlier presence now completely reshaped, no longer leading, only witnessing, and the audience, still absorbing the layers of what had just unfolded, sat in a shared understanding that this moment was not finished, that something larger had been set into motion, something that extended beyond the stage, beyond the applause. And as Evelyn stood there under the softened lights, it became clear that her story was only beginning to surface, and the room, once quick to judge, was now willing to listen. The room did not rush to the next act, even as the stage manager signaled quietly from the wings, because something in the air resisted moving forward too quickly. And Evelyn remained where she was, not demanding more time, not stepping away either, simply allowing the moment to breathe as it needed to. Jason glanced toward the producers offstage, then back at Evelyn, and for the first time that night, he chose not to push the schedule, not to force momentum, but to follow the weight of what had just unfolded. Would you mind telling us a little more?" he asked, his voice careful, stripped of performance, and the audience leaned in again, not out of curiosity for spectacle, but for understanding. Evelyn's gaze lowered briefly, as if searching through something older than the room itself, and when she spoke, her words came slowly, measured. "I used to sing many years ago," she said, and though the sentence was simple, it carried the kind of quiet gravity that made people listen differently, as if every word might reveal something they had overlooked. One of the judges nodded gently, encouraging without interrupting, and Evelyn continued, "It was my whole world once," she added, her voice steady, not nostalgic, not regretful, just honest, and a soft murmur passed through the audience again, not of doubt this time, but of recognition, as if they were beginning to see her not as a surprise, but as someone with a story that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface. Jason shifted slightly, his posture no longer that of a host managing a show, but of someone witnessing something personal unfold in real time, and he did not interrupt. He did not fill the silence, because he understood now that silence was not empty. It was part of the story. Evelyn lifted her eyes again, looking out across the audience, and for a moment, the lights reflected in a way that made it impossible to tell whether she was seeing the room as it was, or as it might have been years ago, and when she spoke again, her words carried a quiet strength. "Life changes things," she said, and the simplicity of it landed deeper than any detailed explanation could have, because everyone in that room understood that truth in their own way. The judges remained still, listening fully, not preparing responses, not thinking ahead, just present. And one of them leaned closer to the microphone but chose not to speak, allowing Evelyn's words to settle without interruption. In the audience, the young girl in the front row held her breath without realizing it, her attention fixed completely, as if she were witnessing something more important than a competition, something that might stay with her long after the night ended. Jason finally nodded slightly, not as a cue, but as an acknowledgement. "And tonight?" he asked gently, his voice quieter than it had ever been on that stage. And Evelyn's expression softened just a fraction, a hint of something unspoken passing through her eyes. Before she answered, "Tonight," I remembered. and the words settled over the room like a quiet truth that needed no further explanation. No one clapped this time. No one moved. Because the moment was not asking for noise. It was asking for understanding. And in that stillness, it became clear that what had started as a performance had turned into something else entirely. Something that did not end when the music stopped. Something that continued in the silence that followed. And as Evelyn stood there under the lights, no longer out of place, no longer underestimated, the room held on to that realization, knowing that what they had just witnessed was not just talent returning, but something far more enduring, dignity rediscovered in its own time. No one spoke for a moment after her words settled, not because they did not know what to say, but because anything spoken too quickly would have felt smaller than what had just been shared, and the room, once filled with noise and quick judgment, now held a different kind of silence, one shaped by reflection rather than expectation. Jason stood still, his usual rhythm gone, his instincts replaced by something quieter, more aware, and for the first time that night, he did not try to lead. He allowed the moment to exist on its own terms. One of the judges finally reached forward, pressing the microphone button slowly, her voice softer than before. "Evelyn, I think I can speak for all of us when I say, we were not prepared for that." She paused briefly, her eyes steady. "And I mean that in the best possible way." And a faint ripple of agreement moved through the audience, not loud, but sincere, because what they felt could not be expressed with simple applause anymore. The other judge nodded, leaning in slightly. "There is something rare about what you did tonight," she said, choosing her words carefully. Not just the voice, but the honesty behind it. And as she spoke, it became clear that the performance had shifted from being evaluated to being understood, something deeper than technique, something that could not be measured or scored in the usual way. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if she accepted their words not as praise, but as recognition of something that had always been there. In the audience, people began to glance at one another, small exchanges of understanding passing silently. Strangers connected by the shared realization that they had all witnessed the same transformation, not just on stage, but within themselves. Jason finally stepped forward again, but this time there was no trace of the earlier smirk, no performance in his delivery, only sincerity. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology," he said. The words simple but unmistakable, and the room responded not with surprise, but with quiet agreement. Because they had all felt it. The shift from assumption to respect, from dismissal to acknowledgement. Evelyn turned slightly toward him, her gaze steady, and for a brief moment, the room held its breath again, not in tension, but in anticipation of something real. She did not respond immediately. She did not rush to accept or reject the apology, and in that pause, there was a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words could have. Then, with a small nod, she said, "It is all right," her voice gentle, without resentment, without emphasis, and that simple response carried a weight that settled deeply, because it did not erase what had happened, it transformed it. The judges exchanged glances once more, not uncertain this time, but aligned, as if they had reached the same conclusion without needing to say it aloud, and the audience, still fully present, felt that conclusion forming as well. This was no longer just about a single performance or a single moment. It was about something that had been corrected in real time, something that had been revealed not through argument or explanation, but through quiet excellence. Evelyn remained at the center of the stage, not elevated above others, not separated, but clearly seen now in a way she had not been before, and as the lights held steady and the room stayed focused, it became undeniable that the night had shifted course, that what had started as entertainment had become something far more meaningful, and that no one in that room would leave with the same assumptions they had carried in when they first saw her step onto the stage. The lights did not dim right away, and no one rushed Evelyn off the stage, because something about her presence resisted being treated like just another segment in a program. And even as the producers waited for a signal that never came, the room held on to the moment a little longer, unwilling to let it dissolve into routine. Jason stood beside her, no longer trying to fill space, no longer performing, simply present in a way that felt unfamiliar even to himself. And when he finally spoke again, His voice carried a quiet respect that had not been there before. "Tonight, we were reminded of something important," he said, not looking at the camera, but at the audience, as if the message was meant for them more than anyone watching from afar. And for once, his words did not feel like part of a script. They felt earned. Evelyn listened without reacting outwardly, her calm unchanged, her posture steady, as if she had already said everything she needed to say through her voice and her silence. One of the judges leaned forward again, her expression thoughtful. "Evelyn, whatever happens in this competition, you have already given us something we will not forget," she said, and there was no exaggeration in her tone. Only truth, the kind that settles slowly but stays. The audience responded, not with loud applause this time, but with a softer, more sustained acknowledgement, a collective understanding that this was not a victory measured by scores or outcomes, but by something far more lasting. Evelyn inclined her head slightly once more, her eyes moving briefly across the room, taking in the faces that now looked at her differently, not with curiosity, not with doubt, but with recognition. And in that moment, there was no need for grand gestures or dramatic exits, because the transformation had already taken place. She turned gently toward the wings, taking a step back from the center of the stage, her movements the same as when she had first arrived, unhurried, composed. But now the room followed her with their eyes, not out of confusion, but out of respect, as if they understood that they were witnessing the closing of something meaningful. Jason watched her go, his expression thoughtful, the weight of the night settling in a way that would not leave quickly, and for the first time, he did not try to reclaim the spotlight. He allowed it to remain where it belonged, even as she stepped out of it. In the audience, conversations did not start immediately. People remained seated for a moment longer, absorbing what had happened, reflecting in ways that went beyond entertainment, because the story they had just experienced was not about surprise alone. It was about assumption, about how easily it forms and how quietly it can be undone. And as the stage finally prepared to move forward, as the lights shifted and the next act waited in the wings, something invisible but undeniable remained behind. A change in the way the room would see the next person who stepped forward, a hesitation before judgment, a pause before dismissal. And in that subtle shift, Evelyn's presence continued, long after she had left the stage, because that night was never really about a song. It was about what happens when dignity is given the space to speak for itself. And in that room, under those lights, everyone had seen exactly what that